In a world obsessed with rankings, two men dare to chisel greatness out of metaphorical granite, one wildly subjective opinion at a time. This show, every episode, we select four icons from a single topic and immortalize them in our own personal halls of fame. Subjective? Absolutely. Debatable? Always. Set in stone? Until next week. Welcome to the Mount Rushmore Show, where your top four says everything about you. I'm Mike Mintz. He's Joe Mintz. And Joe, this is a topic that we've probably both been fans of for quite some time, and it's one of those things where it's history, but it's done in an entertaining way, I would say.
Yeah, today's topic is one of my favorites, and I feel like I always say that, but I mean it every time I say it.
It's
And
fair.
it's
It's
going to
fair.
be sports documentaries, which I absolutely love.
But me too. This is one of those things I remember even as a young kid. I remember my dad was watching this documentary about the Baltimore Colts leaving Baltimore in the middle of the night. And I was maybe 8 or 9 years old. I was still in Pennsylvania at the time. So I was younger than 10. And it struck a chord with me how fascinating real life can be. It's great to have narratives. It's great to have a story with a good guy and a bad guy and clear goals and everything. But every now and again, just a slice of life and peeking behind the curtain of a real thing that's occurring, I think can sometimes be so compelling.
I agree. And it's something that usually it's a story we all remember happening when it happened at a high level. And what's so great about the documentary is you learn so much more. It takes you back to when it was happening, what you were thinking, what you knew, and then it gives you so many more tidbits that kind of flew over your head or weren't even released at the time. And inside scoops. I mean, that's documentaries in general, but you combine it with one of America's other favorite obsessions, and that's sports, and it's just a lethal cocktail of entertainment.
Yeah, agreed. And there's pretty much all of them on my list here are ones that were living memory for me. Either a time period that I was alive in and was well aware of, or even a team or an event of which that I had a great connection to at the time. And that's what you touched on it. That idea of kind of going back and reliving those things, and it almost like is this nostalgia. It almost brings back some of those memories, and you can kind of spend an hour and a half, or even one of these mini series, 5 or 6 hours, kind of right back in that time period and those feelings again.
Yeah. And the inspiration, as always, comes from what's going on in the world. And right now, we just had the recent release of the new Netflix docu-series called America's Team, which dives into the Jerry Jones era of the Dallas Cowboys. I've locked in on this. It's 8 episodes. Came out Tuesday. I've already watched six, so I'm not done yet. But I am in love with it. It's so in love with it that I'm afraid to finish it because I'm going to want more, and I won't get more. It's one of the most well-made sports documentaries I've ever seen. Production value is right up there with The Last Dance, if you remember that one. You've got interviews from just about everyone
Of course.
imaginable.
Uh-oh.
Players, coaches, opponents, media members, cultural fans of the team. And it doesn't shy away from showing the roller coaster, the highs, the championships, the questionable decisions, and the controversies that made the Cowboys one of the most polarizing teams in sports history.
The Cowboys, especially in the 90s, were, you said it, polarizing. People loved them or hated them. And I think it was all due to their success. They were so good for such a length of time. And there is sort of this backlash to success sometimes. We saw it with the Patriots in the 2000s, where if you start to create this dynasty, people don't want you to dominate. Almost they're sick of seeing you win. And I think that was the for a lot of kids in the 90s. There were certainly Cowboys fans, but there were a lot of Cowboys haters too. So
What makes America's team work is how complete it feels. You're not just getting highlight reels, you're getting inside stories, real emotion, and context that brings you back to the 90s when this team was on top of the world and constantly in the headlines. Not that they're not now, but in many ways in a different light. It's compelling, it's dramatic, It's definitely binge worthy. And honestly, if you told me this was the Cowboys version of The Last Dance, I wouldn't argue with you.
Well, that just puts it on a must watch list for me this weekend. You said there's 8 episodes. I might have to try to binge them all today. So
Take it slow. That's all I'll advise.
fair. That's
Um,
fair.
and I want to talk on kind of why I think we love documentaries. And I think it's because they give us something we can't get anywhere else, and that's the access. They humanize the larger than life athletes, pull back the curtain on legendary teams, and give us raw drama of real life that rivals anything you'll see in scripted TV. Um, I mean, if you look at the timeline of just sports docs, it started mostly with standalone films in the 70s, 80s, 90s. Then ESPN really changed everything with their 30 for 30 series in 2009, which blew the doors open on the format. And now with all the streaming platforms, we've hit, I would say, a golden era. Binge-worthy cultural events like The Last Dance, um, uh, OJ Made in America, you name it. And of course, this new Cowboys series. Today, we don't just watch sports documentaries, we share them, we debate them, we consume them like seasons of prestige television.
I think what's really interesting about where we've come with sports documentaries, especially 30 for 30, and I'm glad you brought that up because that really did. That was this phenomenon that really opened the door to a lot more of these films. But we certainly have the big ones like the America's Team about this 90s Dallas Cowboys dynasty, but you also have really niche documentaries. I saw one. I was at a restaurant the other day and they had NFL Network on, and they were doing a full length. It was at least 2 hours about the tuck rule and the game with the Oakland Raiders and the Patriots. I think early 2001, and
Yeah.
you to do an entire documentary about essentially one play. And so it's incredible how we're able to kind of drill down, and so that's great. You can kind of find your thing, and there's probably a documentary about it out there. And if there's not, you should make one.
Yeah, it's not always about the story itself, it's about the emotion that went into the story. You could have a big event, but if it's not told with raw emotion and good storytelling, then it's no good. That's all those elements that make something really good. And Mike, before we go into our picks, I understand you have your own experience with making a sports documentary, which I'd love you to plug here to our listeners.
That's fair. I did make a documentary, a sports documentary about a boxing match that happened in the mid 90s in, of all places, Miles City, Montana. And Miles City, if you don't know, is a town of about 8,000 people. So it's not even a tiny market. It's a non-existent market for television. And yet, for some reason, in the mid 90s, ESPN comes to town. Thursday Night Fights was on the TV. This is a big deal, and they bring in Jeff Mayweather. And if you've ever heard the last name Mayweather in boxing, you would know him. Jazzy Jeff Mayweather is Floyd's uncle, and so that's his connection to it. He was fighting a local-ish Montana kid out of Great Falls named Todd Foster, or Todd Kid Foster. Foster had fought previously, actually won a silver medal in the Olympics. So he was this Olympic guy, and he's this Montana kid, and he's up and coming. He was basically fighting towards a super welterweight title, and Jeff Mayweather presented him as this. This is essentially a title eliminator match. This is not a match that you would expect in a small town. This is a match that should have happened in Atlantic City or in Las Vegas or some of these other big areas. But Foster was adamant that his next fight was going to be in Montana. It was supposed to be in Great Falls. Actually, it was supposed to be in Bozeman. He gets sick. The fight is called off. Eventually, they have to find a new place. Nobody else was willing to take it. And lo and behold, a couple of people in Miles City, a couple of characters in Miles City, decide that they are going to present this fight and make it in a small town. 3,000 people show up to a football field. They don't even have a venue big enough to hold everybody. They have to do it outside in the football field, in the middle of a beautiful summer evening. It's a great story. And it's one of those stories that once I've kind of started to hear bits and pieces of, I couldn't help myself. I started digging and digging and found it every step of the way was more and more fascinating. I mean, the ring was built by the local shop teacher, like because it's a small town, you don't have these professionals that can do these things. And I think it's this great story of a little place putting on a big event and how cool that is.
What I liked about it is it's a story that people outside of Miles City likely don't know of. It's
Of
one thing to
course.
make a great documentary about the 90s Cowboys that everyone knows about, right? It's another to take a story you don't know, make you want to know more, and you learn from all the people that were so entrenched in it. Like, I love that you had interviews from locals of Miles City talking about what the event meant to them in their world. Because although it didn't grasp the world at large at the time, it was the world to everyone around Miles City at that time. And you get the emotion and the um, jubilation that they felt before, during, and after surrounding the event. You had some cool interviews part of it, which I liked.
Yeah, and it's one of those, you're right. And it's one of those stories that it wasn't hard to find these interviews because you could go to Miles City today and find somebody that was alive then, old enough to remember, and they still remember it. It was a massively important event in Miles City. If for Miles City, it was the event of the year, if not the decade or even 20 years. What's ironic is for ESPN and the world writ large, it was Thursday night.
Well, Mike, what is the title of it and where can people find it?
The title of it is The Kid in the Cowtown. As far as finding it goes, I'm still dealing with some of the rights issues with ESPN. But if I can ever get those things squared away, figured out, I will get a version out there for everybody to possibly watch. I'll try to do that this year. That's my goal.
You say it again, the kid and the kowtow?
The Kid in the Cowtown. Miles City is known as the Cowtown, and Todd Foster's boxing nickname was the Kid, or just Kid. Yeah,
The kid in the cowtown coming soon. We'll
yeah.
say
There,
that.
we'll call it that. So
And then before we get into the Mount Rushmore again, I want to set ground rules.
okay.
To qualify, it's got to be a feature-length film or a limited miniseries. So no recurring docu-series like Hard Knocks, F1, Drive Survive, Welcome to Wrexham. Great shows, but different category. My judging criteria is going to be storytelling power, cultural impact, rewatchability, and of course, production quality.
I'm with you. I agree on the idea that we can't do these, never-ending series because where do you even begin and where do you end? And of course, they haven't yet. Additionally, I think I like to keep it somewhat small. I do have at least one of these miniseries on my list, which I think is important because of how impactful it was for its time. It's kind of this cultural touchstone. But also, I know a lot of people like to watch documentaries that way this anymore. We see things, it's kind of funny to think about squeezing a documentary into an hour and a half or 2 hours when you have like Ken Burns, one of the most famous documentarians, doing 18 hours on baseball. So it's not wrong to do a little bit bigger. The question is how big can you go? I have similar criteria. Joe is on my list, but of course, like always, at least one of these picks is a personal pick that means probably more to me than maybe the rest of the world.
You want to kick it off?
All right, I will do that, and I'm gonna do one that is more recent than most of the other ones on my list, and that's The Last Dance. We had brought it up. I was, of course, I was born in the 80s. I was a child of 90s basketball. Michael Jordan was the man. And it wasn't even a question. This wasn't something where we were debating it at the time. You could just turn on the TV, and chances are, if you were watching basketball at that time, Jordan was probably on. The Bulls were constantly televised, and everybody was watching them. It became appointment viewing to watch the Bulls play and to watch Jordan. And Jordan almost, I don't think he ever disappointed me as a kid. And maybe that's kind of rose colored glasses, but going back, just watching him play, the style of basketball that he played and his effectiveness on the court was one of those things. To watch The Last Dance was kind of being taken back to that time period, but also really kind of ripping that curtain open to a degree. And I'm going to get more into the degree here in a second, but it was really great to see moments that I never experienced on television before or had never even thought of, to see not just Jordan, but this is a great cast of characters. You got, Scottie Pippen, you got Dennis Rodman. I mean, you got Phil Jackson, who is one of these all-time great coaches. And you got a really compelling miniseries. One of those ones you talk about America's story and not wanting to have it end. That's kind of how I felt about The Last Dance. I remember I would let myself watch one episode a night, and it became the highlight of my evening was when I got to turn it on. The kids were asleep, and it's like, oh, I get to watch my episode of The Last Dance, and just feeling some of those emotions again.
Mike, I'm going to share this one with you. This is my, I'll just say unanimous number one. And I would say on most people's Mount Rushmore, I would hope. It's so obvious. I mean, this was more than a documentary, as you alluded. It was an event. I mean, the timing of it was perfect. It dropped during the pandemic. All sports were shut down. So this was all we had. And it wasn't like most series that they release all episodes at once. They did it, in my opinion, the right way, doing one or two at a time. I think it was two a week at the time. And I remember when they released, watching both back to back. And all week, I would talk about it with people the same way I would talk about sports. I remember talking to my dad on the phone every week after the first two episodes would drop. And it was a connection point in a very slow time in the world, in a very scary time. And it was also a timing for Michael Jordan. Keep in mind, LeBron James had just won his first championship in Cleveland in a very historic way, coming back from 3-1, the epic block on Iguodala. He was getting a lot of the GOAT talk, right? We were starting to forget a little bit how impactful Michael Jordan was due to recency bias with LeBron James. And I think Michael's ego and his affection to his own legacy motivated him to release this at the time he did. And it made us all more hyper aware of how GOAT status Michael Jordan is over LeBron, in my opinion. And the combination of unseen footage, the interviews, shoot, they got Barack Obama to sit down and get interviewed for this. Just anyone that even sniffed the city of Chicago in the 90s was part of this doc. And Jordan's raw reactions to watching film on the iPad made it unforgettable. Um, and then I love how the players were shown clips of other interviews during filming, which is why you got those iconic real reactions from Jordan. And it made an impact after. I remember Scottie Pippen and Jordan would
Mm-hmm.
feud after because of how the stories were told about those two during that time. Getting some interesting words said from Scottie about his hindsight of MJ and the Bulls after what he appeared to be a hit piece towards him at the time. But incredible. Couldn't agree more on how good this is, and I can't say more about how much I love it.
I just wanted agreed on all points. I just wanted to make one more uh, real fine point on all of this and Scottie Pippen's reaction and everything. Pippen is right to some degree, and as a person who studies history, you have to be careful with how history is presented. Michael Jordan was the executive producer of The Last Dance. What does that mean? That means to some degree he's controlling that narrative, right? And so yeah, he's going to paint himself and possibly the story in a very specific light. That doesn't take away from anything, but I think it is something any watcher that's going to go out there and watch it, just be aware of, who's the person behind this. Of course, without Jordan producing it, you probably don't get some of the interviews like the Barack Obamas and some of the other bigger pools. So it's a bit of a good one.
All right. Well, we'll share the first so you can jump into your second.
All right. I'm going to pick one. This is one that I had watched when it came out. I didn't really I enjoyed it then, but I enjoy it a whole lot more now. This is a famous documentary from the mid 90s. This is called Hoop Dreams. Hoop Dreams is a sports documentary that's less about sports and kind of more about American life in a weird way. If you don't know the story, it's not your cozy suburban neighborhood. This is inner city basketball. This is kids that have immense talent, but they are also from a walk of life that they don't have a lot of opportunities outside of that ability to play ball. And that ability to play ball gives them some opportunities to go to bigger, better schools and a chance to highlight their skills. But what's really interesting about Hoop Dreams is it's appealing to everybody. You don't have to be a basketball fan or even a sports person to kind of get into this film. The filmmaker set out to make a 30-minute film about inner city basketball players. And what they ended up with was 6 years and 250 hours of footage that they could have never had thought that that would have been the reality of what they were filming. They filmed these two kids, Gates and, of course, Arthur Agee, neither of which go on to play professional basketball. And their stories are somewhat tragic, somewhat success, somewhat a little bit of everything. There's really no villain necessarily. The school acts very pragmatically, although you might look at it as villainous from an outside point of view. The coach has his own reasons for what he's doing, and everybody plays their part as real humans. And I think that's what really kind of makes this movie so compelling is you're just watching real life play out. And what you're really watching is the reality. This is the stat, Joe. Let's see here. 500,000 kids play basketball in high school, around that number every single year. Out of those, 25 might go pro. The chances of becoming a pro in the big four are better in every of the other three. Your chances of becoming a professional basketball player are the absolute lowest. There's what, 450 total of them, 15 players on 30 teams. The chances of getting, there's only 2 rounds in the draft. The chances of making it to the pro level in basketball is the toughest of all of the major professional sports in America. So, I mean, it's an incredible thing to design. And a lot of kids that play basketball, that's their biggest desire. And that's what I think Hoop Dreams is great because it captured my feeling, especially as a teen in the 90s, and the idea of like, we wanted to play pro basketball because I watched pro basketball. And then to watch two guys that had some legitimate skill, but the struggles of just life that can come along, not just your ability to play basketball, but everything else, injuries, the realities, the harsh realities of affordability for some of these things. It's a great documentary, and it's one that has kind of stood the test of time.
Yeah, certainly one of the most popular documentaries and an early documentary. We pump out a lot more today than we did back then. Um, my experience of this was being a kid first watching it and being an obsessed basketball player at the time. I was probably 11, 12 years old when I first saw this. And I had my own hoop dreams, like you mentioned. And watching it was kind of tragic. Alluded to that earlier because I thought it was a foregone conclusion that these guys were going to play in the NBA. They're better than me. They're on that path. This is what it takes. The fact that they didn't disheartened someone like myself to know how hard it would be to get to that dream. Because, at that age, you don't really understand what it takes to get to that level. But you like to think it's a nice fantasy in your head that it's possible. And it felt so much more improbable to happen after watching this, unfortunately. Kind of set in reality, which makes it a harder rewatch for me, which is why it does not make my list. I can appreciate the making and the story that's being told, but it kind of bums me out, which takes away some of the rewatchability, which is the criteria I have for mine.
I think that you're absolutely right on that level. And I think that that might be why making it a first time watch is so amazing because it is something that's very unpredictable and absolutely nothing that a Hollywood scriptwriter would ever write, right? Because this is real life and these documentarians cannot control what the outcome of this story is. And I think that what makes this one so good is their ability to allow this to play out the way that it does. To say that nothing happens isn't fair, but to say that it is a slice of real life. And for whatever reason, this has exceeded sports documentaries. I mean, yes, most people actually point to this and they go, if you're going to make a documentary, watch Hoop Dreams, get an idea of what it looks like. So
And honestly, if they made the NBA and became stars, I don't know if it would have been as impactful as a documentary. I think what made it so good was the unexpected outcome that we actually got.
I agree. I like Hoop Dreams, and you're probably right. It may not make a lot of people's list because it is not the happy ending that probably everybody's looking for. All right, Joe, what do you got up?
The next one I have is on the 30 for 30 list, and it might be one of the most powerful 30 for 30s ever, and that's the two Escobars.
Oh, of course.
This is an example of a story I did not know of, nor did I know how it was going to end from starting and finishing it. It tells the story of Andre Escobar, Colombian soccer, and how the drug cartels tied into the game. It's tragic, it's eye-opening, and it's one of those documentaries that transcend sports. When people talk about documentaries being bigger than the game itself, this is the one. And if you haven't seen it, should I spoil it, Mike? Is the statute of limitations in my favor here?
Oh, you've got plenty of spoiling to be done. I want to hear
It's a
more
true
about this.
story. I might as well say it. Pablo Escobar, allegedly, as part of the drug cartel, had Andre Escobar killed after he eliminated the Colombia national team from the World Cup by putting a goal into his own goalie's net accidentally. It was a mistake, could happen to anybody, and you realize how big Colombian soccer was in that country, that nation, and how corrupt it was by the people that own the teams in the league, and how the two tied together. And man, it shocked me. Man, it made me think about sports and outcomes of sports so much bigger than just fun and games, and how this truly became life or death on the field to a level I've never seen before, and I've never experienced as an athlete myself, nor ever expect to, nor I think anyone in America ever would in any sports we consume. But I realize there's another side of this that is so much bigger than we could ever imagine.
The two Escobars is kind of a consensus pick, right? Like if you go online and you ask about 30 for 30 films specifically, that one is going to be regularly brought up. And for all of those reasons you mentioned, but specifically about the one that it's bigger than sports. It's a incredible story that I don't think, especially in America, I don't think many of us even had an idea that this had occurred.
Yeah, I had to give a nod. I feel like we just went with two sad ones, man, but sometimes that's what makes them good.
That
Hopefully, your third is a bit more uplifting.
it will well it's a little bit more standard sports documentary. This
We'll
is my
try to bring brevity
personal
to it, all right, guys? Sorry for listening. We don't want to bum out your day.
this is my personal pick here, and this is the best there never was. Another 30 for 30 film about a running back from Oklahoma named Marcus Dupree. This is a story that this is why 30 for 30 was great for me. There were stories on 30 for 30 I knew about. You think about the Reggie Miller against the Knicks. You think about the LA winnings and the Boston Celtics. You think about those stories. I had never heard of Marcus Dupree. And I remember the 30 for 30 tagline is you think you know, but you have no idea, right? Was their whole thing. And Marcus Dupree was one of those crazy stories. When they started running down the stats, he was obviously well recruited out of high school. He goes off into college. His freshman year at Oklahoma, playing for Barry Switzer, talking about the 90s and the Cowboys, right? Playing for Barry Switzer at Oklahoma, he goes off on a tear, running for over 1,100 yards, but only starting the seventh game of the season. So he did it in a short amount of time. He has the kind of home run running back skills that most running backs wish they could have. You're talking runs of 60 yards, 70 yards, 80 yards, and he's doing it on a regular basis, regularity. In the Fiesta Bowl of that year, he ran for 239 yards. But Joe, he did it on 17 carries. I did the math. That's more than 14 yards a carry over the course of an entire game. That's incredible. You don't do that. He goes on to he has some issues. This is the tragedy part, right? Of course. What happened? Why is he the best there never was? He has some issues, some staying in shape. Some Barry Switzer is going to call him lazy. Some others are going to refer to him as lackadaisical. He's going to gain some weight. He also struggles mentally in the fact that he drops out of Oklahoma and transfers to Southern Miss and thinks that he's going to be able to play. Of course, that's not how things work. So he has to sit out 2 of his prime years. Essentially, he signs with the USFL. By the way, this is the '80s. If anybody was listening, going when the United States Football League, he signs with them, has a decent ish first season, and then kind of gets injured and never really returns. He does get to the NFL, but by then his career is on the downward span. But man, you talk about a guy that had such potential. Marcus Dupree was the guy that should have been an absolute star. And for a variety of reasons we touched on, just never did it. But what makes this documentary great to me, Joe, is a guy I'd never heard of, and all of a sudden going, man, I should have heard of that guy.
Mike, great pick. I thought about this when I Mount Rushmore too in the 30 for 30 collection. And similar story that I did not know of. And when I watched, I did not know how it was going to end. I went in cold. And you think it's going to be more sad than it is because my recollection is I felt like I got a positive closure to this story. It starts with him today, basically as, from what I recall it, driving a truck or
Mm-hmm.
a forklift, and like, okay, obviously he's not, in rags and riches of an NFL star or former NFL star. So that's cleared off the rip. And this is probably going to be a tragic tale. And it goes through the highs of high school into first year of college, into the downward spiral that really came, I would say, after his knee injury, kind of put
Mm-hmm.
closure to it at the USFL when he tore his ACL. It was hard to come back from. But the redemption arc, that the work he put in to get back years later when he's totally out of shape, depressed, he's got people in his ear saying, take one more shot at it. He gives it everything. He's the best shape of his life, the hardest he's ever worked. And he makes the Rams and he plays a season and he hits his goal of making the NFL. Did he have the Hall of Fame, Pro Bowl career in the NFL? No, but that wasn't what the story was about. The story was about redemption, and he got it. He had closure, and he's talking about today, getting emotional remembering and the pride he has not from what potential he maybe wasted or didn't capitalize, but what he was able to do when all the chips were stacked against him. And I felt incredibly positive leaving that, not the opposite of what I thought I would experience as it started when you saw where he was. Great pick, great story, and he's certainly an athlete that inspires many other comebacks, I hope, in all sports.
It's the comeback, right? It's his ability to finally make the NFL the place he probably should have been after all of the work that he put in. And it's kind of one of those things like, is it ever too late to wind it up again for some of us, out there? So, all right, Joe, what's your next pick here?
My third pick is not your traditional ball sports doc, but it's one of the most gripping films you'll ever watch. It's Free Solo.
Oh, God, so good.
Alex Honnold climbed El Capitan without ropes. And if you don't know, El Capitan was forever seen as the unclimbable mountain until um, several people out in Yosemite Park started climbing it with ropes at the time. And it was a big deal with ropes in the 60s when it was first climbed. And then it became more and more of a feat. People started climbing it faster in different ways. But one thing that's for certain is no one's ever free soloed it without any ropes because the risk is so high. I mean, you're looking at life and death in this sport. This is truly like the mistake is made, you fall, you are dead. That is what's on the line. And it's one of those that you watch and your palms get sweaty. I promise you. The cinematography alone is breathtaking. But the psychology behind why he does it is even more compelling. It won the Oscar for Best Documentary. And when you're watching it, it feels like a thriller. Even the camera crew admitted they could barely watch through their own lenses because of the anxiety. You're going to experience that. And another element that made it cool is this guy is almost on the spectrum with his personality, which I think you almost have to do what he does. And it's affected his ability to develop personal relationships throughout his life, or his even ability to desire personal relationships. And during the filming of this doc over the course of several years, as he prepares and then does it, he meets a woman and they fall in love. And you see the ups and downs and challenges he has with that for the first time in his life. Unexpectedly. Wasn't the outcome of this. So he's balancing those two things. So you get this surprise to go with it. This guy not only tactically dealing with how do I do this, but emotionally gripping with the weight of his consequences for what he's going after. Now, all of a sudden, he has a whole new person in his life to live for that he didn't expect, which adds to an element of drama that no one filming at the time expected, nor did he.
I think what makes Free Solo great, I love this. I love it, but it also terrifies me to watch it. I remember watching it the first time and just being like almost gasping at certain moments and just going, man, you're nuts. And the funny thing is when you watch it, you kind of get that feeling like it's not that he's insane, but he's insane for this thing, right? To do, to conquer, to accomplish. It's it's not a sickness necessarily, but it's a driven attitude towards something. I love the little bits behind the lifestyle that he leads, this almost Spartan lifestyle where he's like in his van and he basically lives in it. And you talked about his relationships and all of that stuff. It's this great counterpoint to this insane thing that he's doing, which is, you know, free soloing El Capitan. And yeah, if you're curious if people die doing this, absolutely. People die doing free solo. It is a dangerous occupation. It is a dangerous thing. But to see the dichotomy of those two things, of what his lifestyle is like, and then also this dangerous thing that he's doing, it makes for a really perfect documentary.
I love you touched on the lifestyle. I found that very interesting myself. Him eating sweet potatoes with a spatula out of a frying pan in his lap. I'm like, what a bohemian bachelor lifestyle that is.
He was focused on one thing, and the sweet potatoes and the fork. The fork wasn't part of it. Yeah, that's
No,
for
what's
sure.
the need is the point.
Yeah.
What's the purpose of silverware unless you have a woman making the table in his mind? He's like, I'm living life what makes me feel full, and the only thing that is rock climbing. Everything else secondary. And now all of a sudden, you see him at a Home Depot picking out wallpaper with his now girlfriend, and his priorities have shifted. He's now becoming quote unquote a normal person for the first time in his life, and kind of liking it, but also being scared of it. It's fascinating.
It is, and it's also one that you kind of almost cheer for. You're like, yeah, the guy just did it. You know, he did it on two levels. He
Yeah, he
climbs El
did.
Capitan, and then he might have actually got a normal life out of the whole thing.
And one more thing I want to say about it, what made it so interesting, is when he finally does it and climbs El Capitan, he has a moment where he's really happy. And he's like, this is incredible. You know, you work so hard for this thing. And then the moment goes away and he goes back to his van. He's doing pull ups with his fingers and training again. He just back on the horse. It's hard for guys like that are overindulged in the process. They constantly need a new goal. And it kind of scares me when someone does something like that because now someone has to one up it. What's the next thing? Is okay, he climbed El Capitan free solo for the first time. Now I got to do it faster or I got to find a
Mm.
different one. I feel like it's inevitable that something bad could happen, which is scary because these guys are so driven for the next thing. And you see that after he finishes it, that we can't just stop. We don't just stop once we accomplish a goal. We find the next one. And in a sport like that's dangerous as this, that next one could be your last one. So Alex Honnold's still out in the zeitgeist. He hasn't climbed to the extent that he does these sort of endeavors today, from what I understand. But I hope that he's still around for many years to come and nothing, hopefully, bad happens to him or anybody else because of this endeavor.
You know what's funny is I hope there's never a sequel, Joe. I mean, isn't that kind of an odd thing to say? But like, I'm kind
Yeah.
of with you in the fact that I hope that he just, not that he gives it up. I mean, you got to keep that thing burning, but at the same point, I hope that he doesn't try to outdo it and that he stays, you know, safe. So
Yeah.
that's what you hope for. All right, my fourth and final one. I'm glad you went with a little bit of a out there as far as sports go. I'm gonna go with Icarus. And to anybody that doesn't know, this was kind of the beginning of Netflix documentaries. I don't know if that's fair. I haven't really dug into the history of it, but it's the first one that became kind of, you said the word zeitgeist, so I'll use that as well. It was the first one that kind of became this part of Netflix at the time was releasing very culturally resonant things. Stranger Things was coming out, 13 Reasons Why. They were having all of these moments. The return of Arrested Development and those kind of things were big. And then this documentary comes out, and it's this big moment that hits kind of everybody that had Netflix, was everybody was watching it. And what's really interesting, this is what, if you don't know the story of Icarus, I'll kind of give it to you in a rundown. The beginning of the movie, about 30 minutes of it, is the documentarian, this guy that is trying to win a a bicycle race, similar to like a mini version of the Tour de France. Okay, he's doing the mini version of that. He's also a filmmaker, but he is somewhat of an athlete. He realizes he's not going to win, and so he comes up with this idea that becomes the documentary, that he is going to film himself doping. I'm taking steroids. And he has to find out how to do it. And so he contacts this Russian guy, Rodchenkov. Rodchenkov is this doctor in Russia who is familiar with these techniques, and he helps him essentially dope. Tragedy strikes on the race, and I think his seat broke or his steering wheel or something happens, and he ends up placing like 15th. It's not a big, it becomes a story of a non-story. And you would think that this would be, where your documentary had failed. At that point, the story takes a big time turn. Out of left field, we start to learn that this Rodchenkov guy is not just any Russian doctor, but he is the Russian doctor whose entire role was to not only dope the Russian athletes, but more importantly, to hide it from the International Olympic Committee. He was the head of what was called the anti-doping program in Russia. And what we learn in the documentary, in the film, is this almost geopolitical thriller where you start to go, well, how deep does this go? How does this one doctor who becomes a whistleblower in Russia, of all places, starts to tell this story of how he did it? And of course, one man can't do it himself. It needed the entire effect of, I guess you could say, the government of Russia. And this one goes all the way to the top. And that is what makes it just absolutely kind of bonkers. And it's hard because, are we talking a sports documentary? Yeah, I guess in a tangential way. But it's just this really fascinating story and of course, the real world ramifications of this. Russia now being essentially banned from Olympic competitions for X amount of years because of what was found out, not only in this documentary, but in the real world.
Russia, conspiracy, and corruption. I couldn't imagine those three going together. Who would have thought? And great pick, Mike. Another one, I believe, won Best Documentary at the Academy Awards. And similar to one of your other picks, Hoop Dreams, it has a theme that it has a outcome different than what was expected going into making it. And it was unique in the sense that the focus of the documentary was the filmmaker himself. And he was the lab rat, so to speak, to experiment with where this could go. Now, you don't see that very often. Usually, the filmmaker is behind the lens, not the face of it. And it certainly became very public and popular, but I don't think people in, say, Russia involved in that were as receptive to it as you could imagine. And some of it came off as still today as conspiracy theory. And some of it is because it's coming from the mouth of people involved, and it's becomes a he said, she said. But if you like anything about kind of an espionage, conspiracy, corruption tale involving sports, this is the one to watch.
It's one of those ones that kind of flips the script. I like that you brought up that this is similar to Hoop Dreams. And I had that same revelation when I was putting together my list. And it's funny you brought up my documentary film, The Kid in the Cowtown. I've made a couple of documentaries, much smaller. That was my biggest one, but I've made some smaller ones too. One of the things I've learned about it, anytime you go into it, whatever story you expect to tell, that's not the story. And you kind of find that out. And I think that what makes a great documentary is watching that unfold. And in Icarus, unlike Hoop Dreams, where you kind of, it stretches out over time, in Icarus, you realize even the filmmaker realizes that what he's trying to tell is not at all the story. There's something much bigger going on here.
Yeah, it delivered and on Netflix. Anyone can watch today.
Yeah, it's pretty good. All right, Joe, round it home.
My last one, which I thought might be on yours, I was a bit surprised, and that is OJ Made in America.
It's a great series. Yeah.
This is a masterpiece, 7.5 hours that covers not just O.J. Simpson, but the intersection of sports, celebrity, race, and crime in America. It also won the Academy Award for Best Documentary, and I would say it changed what long form sports storytelling could be. It's heavy, it's thorough, it's certainly unforgettable. And you learn a lot about a big story at the time, about a man involved in that story who's still alive. And keep in mind, I mean, obviously, I think anyone listening to this, not to mansplain here, know what happened with O.J. Simpson. He passed away today, but obviously was acquitted of murdering his wife and her then boyfriend. Um, in a very controversial fashion that didn't age well. In fact, it became a running joke that he got away with murder. And it
Mhm.
obviously ruined his career and his popularity he had before that incident. And he was alive as this was released. And he was not featured in the documentary. It wasn't a story told by O.J. Simpson. It was a story told by all the people that knew him, were involved in his world, and involved in the events around his world before, during, and after such a monumental public uh, courtroom drama, I'll call it. And it outlines the man, and I would say as close to a impartial way as it could. You know, in many ways, he is the villain. Um, in some ways, he's shown as human and how this psyche could have been developed, you know, because it was such a shock to think that this man who has such high public praise could do something this heinous, which is part of the element of why he got acquitted that's featured in the documentary. But it goes into such little detail on his past and his psychology to understand almost like what could make a murder. And again, they can't flat out say he did anything because he was acquitted. You know, obviously evidence is pretty overwhelming, but I'm not going to have an opinion on that. That's not for this show. But it's just a fascinating human study of a very public figure and a very controversial and polarizing one, to say the least.
The story of OJ Simpson is an interesting one, and certainly has been told in a variety of different mediums. This is probably one of the better ones. And you're right. You got to take time with this, and 7 hours miniseries is a way to do it. It's sensational. It's sordid details. I like the idea that what you kind of were bringing up. You know, we can't convict this guy of a crime, but yet on the same level, the argument can kind of be right that like even though he's acquitted by the jury, he's still held guilty by society.
That's a great way to put a bow on that. Well said. Well, I gotta give before we close. Um, I gotta give an honorable mention, and that's a nod to Pumping Iron.
Okay.
Now, it's not the most rewatchable documentary today. Came out in the 1970s. But when you talk about impact, this film put bodybuilding on the map. And for me, as someone who's passionate about the sport, it's impossible not to appreciate what it did for bodybuilding and more specifically Arnold Schwarzenegger's career. Nod to our last episode, Terminator 2 Judgment Day, on your Mount Rushmore movie sequels. Without Pumping Iron, the sport and Arnold himself may have taken a completely different path. Just had to give a nod to it. Not in the Mount Rushmore, but if you haven't seen Pumping Iron and you're in, I guarantee you're gonna want to lift a weight after.
It's just time to totally recommend that. A great pick.
Because I gave so much praise to America's team, and I wanted to acknowledge why it wasn't my Mount Rushmore. And honestly, it's because I think films and shows need time to age. Recency bias is real. When you've got an appetite for something, you can convince yourself it's better than it actually is. And for me, if I still feel as strongly about America's team a year from now, then maybe it deserves a spot. But making the Rushmore means standing the test of time. And I wanted to look ahead as well as for what is next in the world of sports documentaries. The future is bright. Streaming platforms are doubling down on this genre. We're getting more personal stories. There's a big emphasis on nostalgia and new heroes. One upcoming release I'm really excited about is The Heart of Black Mamba. Look into Kobe Bryant's life, legacy, and impact. If it's done right, it has a chance to be one of the most powerful sports documentaries ever. And last but not least is soon to come is give it a nod, the Cowtown.
The Kid in the Cowtown. Yeah, we'll see if that gets out there.
So there it is. That's our Mount Rushmore.
Right. What is it now? What is it going to be in 5 years or 2 years or 10 years? And then the question of what's next. There's these great stories that are going to be told. You heard our picks, and I guess to wrap it up, the question is what do you carve onto your mountain? For Joe Mintz, I'm Mike Mintz. This is the Mount Rushmore Show.
One of the comments that one of the announcers made, and I think you hear it on the tape here, was referring to Miles City as a one-horse town.
The fact is, this is the only show in town.
Well, the one thing I did notice about the event, it kind of put Miles City on the map.
I mean, with ESPN coming to town and having Michael Buffer, you couldn't ask for a bigger event on a bigger stage to bring that local pride out.
I mean, it was just wild. There was 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 people there. They're just yelling and screaming.
I mean, here I was ringside, and there was sweat and blood and things flying around, and you were ducking as people were swinging.
For Todd Foster to be fighting in Montana and to be able to witness that, doesn't get any better.
Push come to shove, we've had some big shows here, and this was the biggest of them all.